So today I have the privilege to do a Q&A session of sorts with Jeff Moreno. He's a physical therapist and running coach or performance expert who's based in Santa Cruz, California. And he was kind enough to volunteer some of his time this Friday afternoon. So we're going to just talk about a bunch of different topics related to running. And hopefully this serves as a good information source for folks out there, whether they're physical therapists, performance coaches, trainers, and feel free to reach out with any questions. So Jeff, thanks for taking the time to connect with me. I've been meaning to do this for a while now, and it seems like you're my long lost brother. So thanks for taking the time to connect and welcome.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I want to thank you for this opportunity. Anytime I get a chance to talk running, I jump on that. It's not only a personal passion of mine, but also a professional passion, obviously. So I thank you, and I appreciate what you're doing in the running community, really asking tough questions, putting good information out there on the internet, in a social media where sometimes there's not great information. So I appreciate all the hard work that you do, and keep doing that. Don't stop. We need more people like you.
Well, I appreciate it. And so I wanted to have you tell folks a little bit about your background and how you've sort of gotten to this point in your professional career, because you're one of the few people out there who has a good lay of the land. And what I mean by that is you sort of understand when physical therapy is indicated. You really understand the whole spectrum, from the time someone may present to you with an injury to getting them back to consistent training to eventually reaching peak performance. So tell us how you got to this point in your career.
Yeah, so I think I went to undergrad at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Beautiful place. I grew up as a wrestler. I ran to lose weight. That was my deal. Had some problems. Had a knee injury, had knee surgery, and decided to become a full-time student once I entered college, and really fell in love with the sport of running starting from there. Moved on from there, went to USC for graduate school for physical therapy, and was introduced to a few people outside of that that were really big influences on me. A couple coaches in the area, in the Santa Monica area, that were training really high elite level athletes. He gave me a wonderful opportunity to basically make a lot of mistakes on his athletes, and I learned a lot from that. And he was an amazing individual, and became the physical therapist for that elite training group, and then went from there to just kind of developing that process. Tried to spend as much time around people who were smarter than me, which was almost everybody at the time. And I still try to take that mantra. I'm always looking for people who think differently, think outside the box, don't say the same things that everybody else says, maybe a little bit more controversial in terms of their thought processes, but I want to know why they think that. I'm interested in their why. I'm not interested in the how and what people do. I'm interested in the why. And that's really been a big component of my life, is really understanding that, not only from a performance standpoint or a rehab standpoint, but also from an athlete perspective. I want to know what the coach knows. And first and foremost, those guys are way smarter than we are, especially the top level ones. I want to know what that person knows. The second thing I want to know is what the athlete knows. And the third thing I want to know is what my colleagues know, and what the research says. And I always live in that paradigm. When you're in that higher performance world, or you're dealing with those patients that live in that world, man, you got to get them better. They need to perform um, within reason. So coaches have become really smart if you're hanging out with that certain level coach, and they see things that would blow your mind. And I have a few people that I hang out with nowadays that every time I get to hang out with them, it's like a mind blow. I can almost not, like, it's like 4 days of that is almost way too much for my brain. So that trinity is really important for me. And the communication between that trinity is really important for me. I think that's kind of my progression. I've had the opportunity to see some really great athletes and make some really profound mistakes. And I think it's okay to not be afraid and make those mistakes. That's how you learn, right? Learning is messy and ugly sometimes. But putting yourself out there and be willing to step on the line and have an opinion, learn from that opinion if it's wrong, and continue to grow regardless of who you're with, is really important for me. So that's my kind of progression to where I've gotten to. So I believe wholeheartedly that movement is life. I believe we're specifically designed to move from head to toe, down to our DNA. I believe that everybody has a very defined uniqueness, but with that uniqueness, there are very fundamental things that still need to occur, and that can be coordination and timing and what have you. Physics, you can't defy the fundamental laws of physics. I've tried, it doesn't work very well. My athletes have tried, it usually doesn't turn out very optimal. So I believe talent doesn't equal skill. I believe once they're on a level playing field, good things happen. You can think of talent also, or skill as also being athleticism. I think talent and athleticism aren't the same thing. So I'm more interested in not someone being talented, but someone being skillful. I'm interested in the cognitive aspects of athletes and how they take that to their training. I'm interested in growth mindset, not fixed mindsets. I want every runner that comes into my clinic to understand that the product of resiliency is performance, not the other way around. I want them to understand that if you're a collegiate athlete and you're coming to see me as a freshman, you have 4 years to get better. And then if you turn pro, you have another 4 years until the Olympics, whatever that cycle may be. You don't have to get better or faster 2 months from now.
I think that's such a critical point too. And, I think we can both attest to this with our backgrounds in different sports, but one of the common issues that I see even among high level runners is violating the RTF rule. And I say this all the time, but to really have someone reach their potential, we were talking about this before we formally started the broadcast here. There's got to be an element of consistency there, because if you get sidelined by injury, you start to lose capacity, and then you have to take the time to restore that capacity and then move forward. So I can't agree more with you on that front. And it does take a while. I have a lot of parents who reach out to me, and they have young sons or daughters who are talented, and they say, I want my kid to be faster. And I say, great. Do you want the 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plan? Because it takes that amount of time, and it's really getting them so grounded in fundamentals. It's not doing anything mystical or magical, but and I think that's one of the things that I see in your work is when you've posted videos from different spots where you've been working with athletes, you've broken things down to such a simplistic level that it's tough for people to even fathom. That's a starting point, So, yeah, which is great.
I think really understanding how to make the complex simple is is a quality that you can't get good enough at. And I wasn't this. I've had to learn the hard way this over time, because I get so excited about running and movement, and as I've grown as a therapist, I start to see more things that maybe I didn't see when I was younger, and I want to quote unquote fix everything, and but you don't need to. There's a continuum that every athlete lives on, and my job as their therapist is really to massage them over in a different direction that they're currently in. And that doesn't need to be way over here right away. It just needs to be that direction. And I really, truly kind of create that environment, because to me, if I need people to understand that it's truly about organism versus environment. Okay. You have the organism, which is the runner, since we're speaking in terms of running, or the child. And they're going to do one of two things. They're either going to cease to exist, which they're not going to do, or they're going to adapt to their environment, right? Specific adaptation to impose demand. It's a training thing, right? I mean, it's a good thing, unless it's in a less than optimal environment. So I want to know environments. I want to step back and look at a huge picture, and I want to see what environment, physically, cognitively, nutritionally, sleep, recover, what kind of environment does that athlete live in, and is that conducive to the performance or the work capacity that they're trying to achieve? And you would be surprised that they have no clue what the work capacity is necessary to achieve what they're trying to achieve. And they have no clue with regards to recovery. The best athletes in the world recover the best. They don't train the best. They recover the best. I'll give you an example of this. Greg Rutherford, I know his coach and his rehab guy. Before the Olympics, he's the Olympic long jump champion. They figured out that he could only work out 3 days a week and stay healthy prior to the Olympics, going into the Olympic Games in London. He can only lift 1 day out of every 2 weeks. So what did they do? They worked him out 3 days a week, and they lifted once every 2 weeks, and he won the Olympic gold medal.
Incredible.
He did not work out 7 days a week, because resiliency equals performance, and if you can't get to the start line, you might as well not even try. So, and I can give you example after example of that. What's your minimum effective dose to produce a desired effect? What do you need to do from a work capacity standpoint to achieve this, whatever this is? Do you need to run 80 miles a week, or do you need to run 120 miles a week? And if you do, does it benefit you? I can't tell you how many guys that come into my clinic and they say, man, I was running 140 miles a week or 20 miles a week, and then for whatever reason I couldn't do that because of work life, and I ran 90 miles a week, and I ran faster in that race this next year than I ever ran ever before. Why? Because the best athletes in the world recover the best.
How did they figure out with Greg, how did they get him dialed into a point where they knew that it was a matter of training 3 days a week, lifting once every 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Was there any particular technology to get there?
Yeah, they were there for 3 years prior to the games, or 2 years prior to the games. And they knew his training history. They also knew his injury history, which was profound. And so through a little bit of trial error testing, physiological testing, octo jump stuff, they found that, man, his ability to recover, he needs this amount of time. I can give you examples with pole vaulters. I have another patient that I've been working with, or client that I've been working with since she was a sophomore in high school. and now she's a sophomore at Stanford University running in cross country and track and field. She came to me as a sophomore and I said, here's your deal. You are an amazing talent. No denying that. But all we're going to do is we're going to create an environment for you that you never stop the process. That's it. I don't care how fast you run. I don't care what your workouts are like. I don't care your race times. All you're going to do is you're going to train for the next 3 years without stopping that process or creating a training gap. Fine, did that, state champ, all that kind of good stuff. Went to Stanford. She comes back to see me every vacation. I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a different environment, but the same environment. And all you're going to do is you're going to train, recover, sleep, eat, be a good student athlete, and not worry about the performance side of it. He just ran under 15 minutes for the 5K. She's doing amazing. Every time I see her, I tell her the same exact stuff because I do not want her to forget that. Because it's not about what you do now. It's about what you do within that environment over time. It's really that simple, but yet complex at the same time. And I want to know every piece of that. There's not much that won't fix an athlete with 70 hours of sleep. I haven't slept 70 hours since I was an infant. And I guarantee you many college athletes and pro athletes don't do that. But they should. So I think it's really about creating environments and really understanding the environment that an athlete will be successful in, and it's individual. For Greg, it's 3 days a week of training. Another guy, it might need to be more. Another guy, it might need to be less. And if you really talk to elite athletes, they'll tell you all the time, I got injured, I couldn't train as much, and I had the best race of my life.
Yeah, I get that all the time too, and I always laugh because I know it's coming too.
Yeah. So, and I've, in my own racing days, it's been the same way. I mean, I gotta do 90 miles. I gotta put 90 on my calendar, right? Worst race of my life. I'm gonna run 60 miles and have a lot of quality and a lot of recovery. Best race of my life, right? So I think it really is about creating environments and understanding that. If I'm talking to young kids, which is really a part of my passion with a website I created called Move to Thrive, it's about getting families and kids to understand that variability of movement at any athletic level is extremely important. I want kids to be kids. I want kids to play. I want them to move in a variable environment. There's nothing better than nature to train an athlete. Don't specialize. Don't run slow. If you're 13 and under, you better not be running long distance slow. How many 3 to 5 year olds know that you watch run jog?
Yeah,
they don't. They sprint. And I can show you a 3-year-old and a picture of the best 110-meter runner in the world right now, Aries Merrick, because I took his picture, and they look exactly the same. Patterns are patterns. Okay? So I'm interested in development, kinesiological development from a young age and how they develop. I'm interested in sports that they've played. I'm interested in what they've done, what they have not done. I'm interested in environments. What environment are we putting the organism in? And how does that organism express movement at a higher level when they're asked to do that? Not very well nowadays. And every coach will tell you the same thing.
And it's interesting. I mean, the whole idea of basically letting kids play and just getting involved with different sports, I think that's something that's been such a blessing in my own case, where I dabbled in all these different sports because it made running very easy. And I think, maybe I had a little bit more ability than some folks with running, but when people say, "Oh, how did you get to this point with running?" I said, it was from tennis, it was from skateboarding, it was from snowboarding, it was from playing golf, basketball, soccer. And it's amazing when I have athletes come in and I just watch them move. I know how much time they've spent in sports that really challenge them in from a triplanar standpoint. A lot of the runners that I see who seem to just continue to get injured, they've spent so much time in a sagittal plane and have never mastered the frontal and the transverse plane. It's just so apparent when I evaluate them. And it's also fun because it's easy to just take them out of the sagittal plane to basically create a stimulus for growth and adaptation.
Yeah, I think that's my ultimate goal over time is to really reinvent that whole process for our youth, and it really came more to me on the other spectrum. I had the opportunity to give a lecture at Stanford to their sports medicine team on a running athlete, and someone asked me a very profound question. He said, "How much of this are you going to be speaking about in the next 10 years?" And I sat there and I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to be saying the same exact stuff, unfortunately." And so I had my aha moment at that point, along with just seeing 11-year-old kids for reasons that I should never see an 11-year-old, 8-year-old kid for. And there's nothing wrong with those kids. They just never organically develop based on the environment that they live in, right? It's just pure biology. It's that simple. So I said, well, let's just create a conversation. Let's start creating change. And so that's where Move to Thrive came out of. And it really came from the top down for me instead of the top up. So, because when I look at an athlete, I don't look at them at the now. I see them when they were actually younger. And it's really a youth thing. If you want the injury rates in all professional sports, running, which are profound, to go down, you better deal with the youth. Let me repeat that. It's not the current athlete problem. It's our youth's problem that become the current athlete's problem. It's that simple. Like, I'm treating athletes that have problems now, but if their physical literacy was appropriate when they were younger, their variability of movement was better, their ability to organically develop like they were intended to do, like every kid 0 to 2 years of age does, or before the age of 5 does, good things would be happening in the NBA. Good things would be happening in the running world. I truly believe that. I think Bloom, who did a lot of the talent work, and I'm not a big talent guy, but I thought a quote that he had was really interesting. He said, "I was looking for exceptional kids, and what I found were exceptional conditions and environments." He was looking for talent, but what he found was the environment that they were in that was conducive to the development of their athlete. And that's all the greatest training centers that I know. There's nothing special about them. But what's special is they create an amazing environment to allow the athlete just to develop like they were intended to develop. And then they can reach their genetic potential at that point, whatever that may be. It's that simple. Create an environment. Now, from a specificity standpoint, for us, that means dealing with the inability to control triplanar motion. That means dealing with the poor rate of force production that every runner deals with in the United States right now. That means dealing with their inability to overcome gravity at a constant pace, distance, and whatever they're trying to do. So if someone said, quickly, tell me the problem with runners right now, and I would say, well, it's a environmental development thing. And then if you wanted me to be more specific, I would say based on the environment and based on their inability to organically develop due to lack of variable movement, they can't control gravity and they can't overcome gravity. Their ground contact times are very large, even if their strides are small. So their frequency can look good, but that means that their flight time probably got better, but their contact time never changed. They're still dealing with gravity the same amount of time that they did when they had a long stride. They're on the ground the same amount of time. Time over distance, that's the muscular demand of that's pretty large, right? Even if they're just applying the same amount of force, they're working longer on the ground than they should be. So I'm really interested in, from a running perspective, the rate of force production. The amount of force that that athlete produces in a certain amount of time based on pace and speed.
Are there any exercises that you think are very helpful to refine that ability? What are some of the things that you may incorporate in working with athletes? So, saying healthy runners, to sort of address a deficit in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. There's a couple things that I use a lot. One, first of all, I need the athlete to understand their tendencies. So I don't ever want the athlete to what I call roll dice. So in our medical world, sometimes there's a lot of stuff out there and they're not sure what they're doing ever. So I simplify it and I say, here's your tendency, even though there may be a lot of tendencies. But what can I give them the most bang for the buck at that time? And I want you to know that this is your tendency, and this tendency based on your movement signature is probably going to persist. And you're going to have to really be aware of this. And your drills build context to your workout. So I'll have an athlete and I'll say, okay, I want you to show me your drills pre-workout. And they'll go through them. There's no cognitive thought process. Their control form is horrible. Their contact time, their force production, they have positive power outputs in their lower leg. They have no front side mechanics, it's all backside. It gives me a window not only into what their running is going to look like, but also gives me a window into developmentally how they've been as an athlete from young to now. So, and I look at brain first. I ask them questions that allow me to see how their brain represents what they're trying to do. And I give them the least amount of cueing possible so I can see that processing occur and the output of what it is physically. So for example, one of my simple tests that I'll ask them to do is I'll ask them to stand on one leg. The athlete's going to do one of two things. They're either going to create hip flexion with ankle dorsiflexion and knee flexion, or they're going to create no hip flexion with ankle plantar flexion with knee flexion. And if I see that, piece of cake, easy. I know exactly what I'm going to see when they run. They're going to have very defined backside mechanics. They're going to have very poor high knee position. They're going to have a very high heel recovery. They're going to have a very high positive output in their lower leg. They're going to usually come in and tell me they have either knee pain or lower leg pain. And it was a representation of what their brain is or what their body's most efficient at. I don't like asking someone, I think Gray Cook is amazing, but asking them to come up and over a hurdle step doesn't tell me how their brain represents movement. I want to know what they do without thinking.
I think that's really important too, because I think we have a tendency, especially in the physical therapy community, to over cue. And when I have people, when I first introduce an exercise to them, I say, I want you to do this, and I'll demonstrate it, and then just watch. And I'm also aware of the fact that I've already given them a model of performance that they may try and adopt, but what I make sure I'm very careful not to do is to over cue them and have it be this very idealistic pattern.
For sure.
And that's why I put a lot of the slow motion stuff out early on, because it allows me to get a window into their auditing process and how they basically the motor program that they come up with to execute a movement.
No, I think that's amazing. I love that. I like stepping back. Remember, in our world, I think we've gotten really reduced into this. But if you step back, it's amazing kind of what you see. And so I'm a fan of running, so I'll just randomly show up at track fence because Stanford's really close by, and just watch. Not as a therapist, but as a therapist, and just take a step back and look at individuals move and how they solve chaos at the end of a race or in the middle of the race or mentally. I think that's really interesting. Going back to what do I do to increase rate of force production, there's a great drill by Dan Path, who I think is absolutely amazing and a genius. He calls it a dribble drill. And it's really to facilitate parabolic motion of the leg, because I want runners to understand that at pace, after they've accelerated, which is most distance runners, they're just running at pace, right? Motion of the leg, patterning is very parabolic and circular. So it's like you on your bike. Where you start is where you finish, almost. Very parabolic. If it gets elliptical, we got a problem. It teaches propagation of force, foot contact, posture, body position. It brings context to the athlete. And I'm always trying to get the athlete to bring context to what they're doing. If I ask the athlete, hey, why are you doing that skip? Why are you doing that drill? And they tell me, well, this is what my coach wants me to do. And a good example of this is you got an athlete that over rotates and he is very elliptical, over strides, blocks, high ground reaction forces, I got knee, whatever it is. Should they be doing a B skip? Probably not, because they're already good at that. Like, why have them do that when they already do that every step they take in a race and they can't recover quick enough, and it's a problem. They already have a defined motor program to do that at the expense of their knee or lower leg or what have you. So what's context? What do they need? What do they don't need? What are you trying to fix? Why are you trying to fix it? What input do you need to produce the output that you want? Give them context and simplify it. So rate of force production is huge for me. People will come into the clinic and they will look weak and they'll have a Trendelenburg gait and their knee will adduct and all this stuff. And as soon as you ask them to improve their rate of force production, everything levels out and they're symptom free. Did I make them stronger? No. I asked them not to work against gravity as long. Gravity, being on the ground, is overrated. You do not want to be on the ground. You want to get off the ground and get back on the ground and get on the ground again. For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. Hit the ground and get off the ground. Simple. Hip extension, we need it to complete a cycle, but it's overrated in terms of force production. You look at the vertical force graph. Force at initial contact comes up, the peak is at mid stance, and then what happens to force as after mid stance? Dramatically goes down. Why do I want to spend more time back there? Because if I spend more time extending my hip, what's my opposite leg do? It keeps going forward because running is cyclical and it's pattern, right? I get longer, I stop my knee motion, I overextend, I block, and I repeat the cycle. I'm usually very lower leg dominant. Those athletes come in with huge calves. Okay. Patterns. I'm looking for patterns. I'm looking for commonalities in the best athletes in the world.
That's a great point. Sorry to jump in here. You know, I see so many runners just cranking on their hip flexor stretching, and you know, I was just putting together, actually finalizing my presentation I'm giving next week, and I said, look, hip extension is relatively similar between walking and running. You know, so I think a lot of it's sort of illusory, and I try and get people to stop cranking. Now, sometimes folks may go into, it's natural to go into anterior pelvic tilt when you run. But sometimes, you know, there may be situations where if people are dealing with low back complaints and, you know, perhaps they're falling into a little bit too much. I mean, you have to take that on a case-by-case basis. But I think your point's very well taken. And, you know, you have to look at where the force is coming from and at what point in the gait cycle.
For sure. I think the other thing that's highly overrated or underrated is what happens prior to ground contact. So most people complain of pain when they're on the ground because then that's when you're dealing with gravity, right? But what people don't understand is what happens prior to that is what dictates ground contact. So if I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time and I'm generating force in a way that increases load and increases work inappropriately, that reduces coordination and timing and what have you, then my muscles are stupid. They're not smart enough in less than 0.17 seconds to pull me back into the right position and get me off the ground again. What happens prior to ground contact dictates ground contact. Really important.
And that sort of echoes a lot of Novacek's work. And, you know, when he talks about muscles are typically active in anticipation. And, you know, it sort of drives me crazy when I have a lot of runners coming in to see me and they're like, I need to develop my glute max. And I say, develop, I don't know, not necessarily. It's rhythm and timing and coordination that they need to work on more than strength, because, you know, glute med time obviously important, but, you know, with the glute max, it's really not doing much in the way of force production. You know, it's really in anticipation of initial contact that
sure.
Working. So, you know, it's the leg press that perpetuates a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, and I was really happy. No one really studies this. There's an article that came out by Brian Noren from University of Kentucky.
Yeah.
And he's the only one that is kind of even slightly looked at it, swing fade. And what he found is higher levels of hip flexion reduce ground reaction forces just because they create better vertical force, right? Force is not bad. Runners need to understand that force is really good, especially if you want to go fast. What's bad is the direction at which you apply force and the amount of time that you're on the ground applying it. That's it. People need to understand that. And so if I'm parabolic and circular, I can generate better vertical force production. If I'm elliptical, because I don't have good hip flexion, whether I'm in too much of an anterior pelvic tilt or for whatever reason that may be, then I'm going to be in trouble a little bit because I'm still going to recover my leg forward, but the only thing I can do to use that is my rectus, my thigh. I'm going to overextend my knee because I got to recover my lower leg, and then it blocks and I get into trouble. So I really need people to kind of look at the bigger picture. And it's not just about what happens on the ground. It's not just about the foot. It's not just about the glute. What happens when I bring my knee up into hip flexion to my glute, my hamstring? I eccentrically stretch the fibers of the muscle, the tendon, the capsule, and that creates an pre-activation or pre-tension, and it lowers my tibia down, and I don't overextend my knee, and it prepares me to accept or shock absorb and attenuate force, and then I'm off the ground again, and I repeat the cycle. If I don't create that, I'm not going to create as well a pre-activation effect. My foot's probably going to be a little more plantar flexed, potentially. I'm going to actively have to deal with my lower leg than more passive. And I think of the lower leg as purely a spring, and all you're doing is preparing the spring to load and then let go. And you know, like, you look at really good runners, they're going to have less muscle away from their body and more muscle closer to their body, the middle of their body.
I'll tell my friends that, who are always ripping on me for having skinny calves.
Yeah, like if I see skinny calves, I'm like, awesome.
Yeah.
You have a good spring and you're not overusing it actively.
Yeah,
So like, I'm looking for trends. I'm looking for commonalities, and that's a big trend to me. And then I have 5 things that I think are very basic and fine from a what I call run-to-middle standpoint, and I want to see good control of their chassis. I think of the arms and legs as purely wheels. And in order for me to generate force from my wheels, I need to have something stable for them to sit on. Yeah. The next thing is if you want to go straight ahead, you better move most of your body in that same direction, right? I mean, there are some subtleties based on structure, but most people live within normal ranges of their structure, and they better move their body in the direction that they're moving in. It's that simple. If you want to generate force, you better reduce your lever arm when you hit the ground. It's that simple. If you want to run consistently and efficiently, you better have good coordination and timing. And how do you train that? And the 5th thing is you better be good at dealing with gravity. I always tell my runners, if you lived on the moon, you'd be awesome. But we don't live on the moon, so you better be good at dealing with gravity and then getting off the ground as quickly as you possibly can.
And do you think that ties into some of Heiderscheid's work? I want to talk a little bit about some of the research that you think is very meaningful that would help clinicians.
Yeah, Heiderscheid just came out with an article, I think, last year that looked at muscle activation patterns
at the hip.
I think reading that one and taking some of that information and really kind of start thinking about it and applying it on a greater perspective, I think would be a good starting point for a lot of people. Like, what's going on in the muscle as the leg is in the air? Okay, I'm more interested in that than when the leg's on the ground, because that to me is going to dictate what happens on the ground. Now, it also is cyclical, right? So you got to look at the contralateral leg on the ground before you go into double limb float as well. You got to look at opposite shoulder position. What's the shoulders doing that? I love watching people, and you're going to see commonalities. If I see scapular retraction in a running athlete moving away from me, which is really easy to see, how is that going to affect every other piece of their body? Is that going to facilitate rib elevation? What's that going to do to their arm position? They're going to be abducted, internally rotated. What's that going to do with rotational forces that they got to control more? What's that going to do with pelvic position? What's that going to do with lower leg position? I'm looking for patterns and commonalities. I'm looking at a bigger picture than just that. I shouldn't say this because if people watch this, they might get offended, especially some of my clients, but I don't care about pain. And I don't care about pathology. I think proper movement produces proper healing. I think in terms of plan A and plan B, here's plan A. If you can't do plan A, you better be doing plan B. And it better look as close to plan A as possible.
I think that, just to echo that, I think we can discuss pain very simply with these patients, but most running athletes that I see are not chronic pain patients.
Mhm.
I see a lot of folks treating them as chronic pain patients. I think that they're, typically healthy, motivated people who need to have their situation reconceptualized, but they're largely mismanaged and they're just working with the wrong information.
Mhm. I couldn't agree more. I think that's really important to understand, and also, how you communicate to the patient is important.
Bear with me 1 second. I just need to get my power cord.
So I think that's a huge component of everything. And again, getting the patient to look at the bigger picture, getting a therapist to look at the bigger picture, I think is extremely important. So.
So I wanted to just chat a little bit. So I'm going to give you the piano background now. Sorry for that. I didn't expect my power to run out. With strength training, that's sort of the new focus with a lot of running injury management or preventing running injuries. What role or emphasis do you place on strength training with your runners?
It depends on the athlete. And what they've done in their past, what they've been exposed to, where they are at in their career, how young they are. But it's low on my totem pole. I'm more interested in quality of movement, proper movement. I'm interested in habits. I'm interested in environments. I'm interested in strength as being a product of resiliency over time. Um, what's going to happen to an athlete if they're able to train because the environment was created to allow them to do so, from a strength perspective? They're going to get stronger, right? If I am interested in strength, I'm interested in power. And I'm interested in the ability to produce a lot of force in a short amount of time. And I combine that in all my athletes. I don't care who they are. I like really short hill work, because not only do I want them to generate force in a short amount of time quickly or a short period, but I also want them to facilitate a pattern that the environment creates. So when you're going up a hill, how much more hip flexion do you need than going on flat ground? The environment predisposes that to be greater, right? So I'm interested in creating environmental places where it produces a product or output that I'm looking for. So that's one environment that I'll use. I'm interested in what I call a wicket drill, which is I give them a external stimulus and then I get them to move over the external stimulus to create that parabolic motion. I'm not interested. I try to stay away from internal cues, but the internal cues I give them build them context. So I'm very interested in external cues in terms from a brain standpoint, how that process is better. And the wicket drill is a big one for me, because it's like running on a trail and then moving up and over a stick. I don't want them to kick my stick and have a high heel recovery. I want them to move up and over the stick. So I space them out. The spacing is dictated by speed. And I don't care who the athlete is, if they're a distance runner, sprinter, soccer player, basketball player, it's all the same to me. Running is running. Ultra running is running. I still want to see the same pattern. It's just going to look different to most people, but there's a pattern to it. I'm looking for patterns, and running is running. My 3-year-old daughter running next to the Olympic champion it's a pattern. It's the same. So I think strength is great, and I think it's appropriate based on patient to patient. But I think in our culture, it gets too much talk. And you know this, just being out of Irene Davis's lab and stuff. You know, any monkey can get stronger, but what do they do with it is really what matters, right? So, like, I have a bodybuilder running up a hill. How good is that going to look? I mean, he's got great strength, but he's not going to go anywhere. So, can they use and generate force in a short amount of time? The best Ethiopian and Kenyan runners, they're not a picture of strength. You sneeze and you'll blow them over.
Absolutely.
And if you tested them from a strength standpoint, they would be very poor, but they have high levels of coordination and timing over long distances repetitively.
And that's great to hear you say that, because you read a lot of articles in the lay press, and they talk about, oh, wait till these Kenyans or Ethiopians get a hold of kettlebells, and if they only did X, Y, and Z form of strength training, and I say, well, we can say that once we start beating them, So until we start beating them, we should say what is it that they're doing with their training, because we can't say that it's dysfunctional or it's not an effective strategy, because they're winning the races.
For sure. If we really wanted the Kenyans and Ethiopians to get worse, we'd have them all train in America and live like Americans. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Take their third world environment away from them, put them in our socioeconomically advanced culture, and they're not going to do as well.
And I think so much of a cultural influence too, and I've been reading a lot about different cultural codes, and I think with the U.S. it's you have to work tirelessly. It's really a no pain no gain mentality. You got to just gut it out. That's very unhelpful when you're dealing with performance athletes, and I think that's something that is very pervasive, and it's so pervasive in the triathlon culture that I've been exposed to.
It really bothers me. I can give you. Here's an example. My colleague works with volleyball primarily, and he created an environment last year for this volleyball team, and they had literally no injuries. Right? They actually did less work. The quality of work was higher, and it was focused on resiliency and movement, what have you. But that mindset is so pervasive in our culture of if I'm not working hard, I shouldn't be working at all, that the coach says, hey, I really want to start Olympic lifting again. Let's start lifting, like, hey, you just went a whole year and didn't have a problem.
Change it.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like the guy didn't even get it, right? Like, as much as you preach to them, they didn't get it, because like, I guarantee you Kenyan runners aren't in the gym 24 hours a day like some of our distance runners are currently. And I know one right now, actually, they're doing stuff that they don't even know why they're doing it. Like, why are you doing that? Because someone told me to. Well, what purpose does it serve? I don't know. Like, are you crazy? Like, this is your body. This is what makes you money and gives you a living, and you don't know why you're doing that? Like, minimum effective dose. Create a third world culture for your athlete, and I guarantee they'll be fine. Get them to labor appropriately on a daily basis, consistently, and they'll be fine. How many of our kids actually labor anymore? Not many. They go from no labor, no variability of movement, to high competitive activities. If it's cross country, once August starts, they're training for 3 weeks and then they're racing. What did they do before that? Absolutely nothing. You know, like, why does that guy have a shin splint? Why wouldn't he? Like, you know, like, yeah, he's mechanically doing this, this, and this, but he was never in an environment that is allowing him to deal with gravity over time and distance at a given pace for so long. Take a step back and look at the bigger picture. That's Move to Thrive to me. I mean, I think here's a good example. I'll give you a great example. The NBA. Every time, and I'm writing an article on this right now, every time I look at the NBA and I watch them and I see all their athletes sitting on the bench, it makes me cringe. This is an environmental problem. Those guys look like they're 6'9" and they're sitting in chairs that are built for 5-year-olds.
Yeah, good point. Get
bigger chairs. I mean, you want to have less knee and back pain? Don't let that 6'9" dude sit in a chair for a 5-year-old. Like, that's an environmental influence that is easily changeable. Spend $50 and get a bigger chair. No one sees that because everybody's about patella tendinopathy, patellofemoral joint syndrome. You take that athlete that's been sitting on the bench for 20 minutes and then ask them to accelerate, decelerate, and jump and land, why wouldn't he have knee pain? And then that athlete goes home, takes a shower, gets in his Porsche that's the same size and same 5-year-old chair and creates the same environment. What are athletes' environments that are facilitating day in and day out problems? It's not about the run. Always. It's not about the jump. What's their environment?
Yeah, and I think that's probably stuff that you're capturing, and you mentioned that you have a questionnaire, and I do the same thing. I'm very curious to learn, who this person is, and also to get an idea of their lifestyle and just what they expose their body to. And then I can start to sort of say, here's what I think we need to do to improve your running or to get you out of trouble. There's so many factors to consider, and I think that it sort of gets into the whole biopsychosocial approach to things to some extent. But no, I think you make some great points there. So can I switch gears a little bit?
Totally.
And then we'll wrap up from here. So there's a lot of focus on ankle dorsiflexion right now, and we were talking about volleyball players, and I'm going to bastardize the pronunciation of this person's name, but Malieris and Joe Cook were on a paper looking at ankle dorsiflexion and how
I think I lost you, Chris. Can you hear me?
the focus on.
Oh, I just heard you. Hold on. I lost you for a second.
Okay. So I was just, are you still with me?
Yeah. What was the Jill Cook or the Cook stuff? Dorsiflexion?
Just looking at ankle dorsiflexion, we were talking about volleyball at one point, and I don't know if any work has been done as it relates to basketball players, but they had correlated a loss of ankle dorsiflexion with patellar tendinopathy. And I was just saying that, with sprinters, the need for ankle dorsiflexion is much less with regards to sprinting specifically. You probably need more dorsiflexion to just get through day-to-day activities. But with distance runners, especially recreational distance runners, how much of a focus do you put on ankle dorsiflexion, or do you find yourself addressing ankle dorsiflexion limitations a lot?
My focus is absolutely huge.
Okay, that's comforting to hear.
Huge. Like, yeah. I think profound, because I think it's almost some coaches would say that it's an initiator of a pattern, which is triple flexion or front side position. And not only do I want to see dorsiflexion ankle, But I also want to see toe extension as well. And this is really easy to decipher on what type of athlete you have. Is remember, the lower leg for me is just purely a spring. And I want to pre-activate the spring, and then I want to hit the ground, and then I want the spring to just do its job. But if I'm in a position where I'm a little positive, I have to load or attenuate force, which is going to happen. Sometimes that facilitates a positive power output in the calf, and then it's going to be a problem. So I think I like the dorsiflexion idea. Absolutely crucial in our environment and culture. Never happens. Like, I think it's very underrated, and it's easily testable and objectively to look at, not only from a just basic movement standpoint, but also on the table or in the clinic. And but again, I think it's an actuator. I think it's something that helps facilitate a pattern that I want to see at a very high level. When you're on a bike, it's just as important when you're walking, right? When you're sprinting, basketball players, yeah, I mean, like, it's huge. It's got an NBA guy right now that I've done work with, and he can't get into that position. His talar crural joint can't posteriorly glide as a result of that. He blocks. He has this talar dome effect, right? And it drives more anterior knee shear. It doesn't allow him to pre-activate, preload, and control his lower leg. Creates body position issues in terms of his upper body is always posterior to his lower leg, and his ability to control the direction at which he applies force at that point is really bad. And just think of it this way: if I'm coming in the ground and I'm coming in hot or plantar flexed, large force, small surface area, not always a great thing. And yeah, sprinters are more into their forefoot, but I can show you the best sprinter in the world, the Olympic gold medalist in the 110 hurdles, and he still has a pretty good foot contact, and he's distributing force pretty well, and he's loading his spring. And there's differences within that, but I still want to see that regardless. And I think it's really underrated. And then you got to take a bigger step back and, well, why is that occurring? Like, most of the time it can become a limitation issue structurally, from a tissue standpoint, joint standpoint, but most of the time it's an environmental influence based on habit and based on that's how they produce force. They produce force from bottom up instead of from top down. Yeah, I think absolutely huge. Certain camps would disagree, but the camp I live on is, man, that's huge. How many times do you see calluses on the end of their toes, right?
All the time.
Yeah, positive power output in the calf. They probably have huge calves. They probably have lower leg pain or lower leg problems, right? Stress fractures.
And that's what the research clearly shows. It's typically knee and distal. You know?
Yep. Yeah, every single time. I saw a professional runner on Tuesday. She runs 4:10 for the 1500. Every one of her toes has calluses under it, and every injury that she's ever had has been below her knee. Well, why wouldn't she? Like, that's the only she's using to generate force. She has large force in small surface areas. She's very extrinsic, so there's not a lot of she doesn't have she's very extrinsically dominant before intrinsically stable, and that's not optimal. Like, I see it all the time, and like, she was kind of told, hey, I need you to go to your forefoot more. Well, she was already doing that perfectly. And then it just fed a greater pattern for her that actually she hasn't had problems yet, but her glute and her dominance of her small external rotators of her hip are on fire. Her rectus is like amazing. Her rectus femoris at producing hip flexion with knee extension, which you do not want. So that pattern is consistent in all my runners. Ankle plantar flexion, knee hyperextension, femoral internal rotation, small external rotator of the hip dominance, gluteal divot on both sides, anterior glide of the hip, some form of a sway back, thoracic kyphosis or limitations of thoracic extension, rib elevation, abduction of the shoulder, internal rotation, palms down when they run, cervical spine, capital extension with cervical spine flexion. Why is that? Well, many reasons, but mostly environmental. And then it perpetuates a habit at higher levels. I mean, this girl is 4'10". She'll make the Olympic trials. If she stays healthy, good things can happen for her. And we had to just massage her out of that whole process. And those people are smart. They know their bodies. And once you give them that aha moment that, oh my gosh, this is easier. I'm able to generate more force. My thighs don't hurt after I run because I'm not constantly using them. It really becomes easy, but you got to give them context. You got to give them the why, and they got to be able to feel it so they can reproduce it. So I'm glad you mentioned that because it's extremely important, and that's why basketball players, the most injuries in basketball are ankle injuries. The most injuries due to lost time playing are anterior knee pain, patellofemoral pain. The reasons why, well, that's the reason why. Why doesn't anybody teach a basketball player how to run correctly? You'll watch a basketball player run, and all they're doing is accelerating and decelerating. But it's like the chair thing. No one just gets them bigger chairs. Well, no one just teaches them basic fundamental movement, right? 4,500 basketball players, 45, almost a little over 4,500 basketball injuries in a given year of all 30 teams. Lost games, that was lost games of all the teams. Per team average is about 153 games per team lost. The average amount of the average pay per NBA athlete is $3.8 million. The median is just over $2 million. This is a cost thing for their organization, man. I mean, like, yeah, let's keep your athletes healthy, and I guarantee from a cost benefit standpoint, it's going to be better for you.
Mal McHugh, who is one of my primary mentors at the Nicholas Institute of Sports Medicine, he wrote an amazing editorial in the Scandinavian Journal, and it was entitled "Protecting Your Investments," and how
Sure.
a lot of team owners and just folks who are on the managerial side of things, that we think these injuries it's like getting struck by lightning. It's just this random event. When there are clearly risk factors in environmental situations, it sort of predispose an athlete to injury in the first place, yet we don't invest enough money in trying to study that end of things.
Yeah, I think
Love that editorial.
that's awesome. Yeah, there's certain groups right now that are actually profiling athletes prior to their or during the combine phases, because GMs are starting to get understand this a little bit. Like, I'm spending $50 million on this guy in a 3-year period, and he's only played 15 games for me in the NFL. Like, that isn't good business. And so they're looking at athletes, and they're looking at their injury histories, and they're asking people to come in that understand movement a little bit better and say, hey, is this a good investment for me? Or is this a better investment for me? And I think that's really, really interesting because the New England Patriots are pretty darn good, but they don't have a lot of stars on their team.
Good point.
The Spurs are pretty darn good, and they pace themselves really well, and they're the least injured team in the NBA always. What is their environment different from the Knicks, who's the worst NBA team in terms of injury history? Like, you know, there's some very defined commonalities. And why is Tim Duncan good? Well, that guy plays every year for 18 years and hardly misses a game. Why is Bernard Lagat good? Because that guy never gets hurt. You know, like, why was Carl Lewis so good? Why was Michael Jordan so good? You know, like, I look for commonalities. Like, why are these guys good? Yeah, they're talented, but so is Derrick Rose, and he can barely stay healthy a whole year. Like, so is Kevin Durant, but he has a hard time. You know, like, you know, what's the difference? Well, because talent doesn't equal skill. Talent doesn't equal skill. Talent doesn't equal athleticism. I'll take an athletic kid over a talented kid any day. I'll take a skillful kid over the best kid coming out of high school or college every day. I'll take someone mentally more tough and have a growth mindset than I'll take someone who runs faster any day. Mm-hmm. And I think organizations are starting to figure that out a little bit.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's taken so long for that to happen, but I think that they're starting to get folks in the mix who can give them a better lay of the land and help them with their decision making. So I've had a chance to interact with Patrick Ward, who's out in Seattle now with the Seahawks, and someone like that, it's just critical to have in the mix. And he's a special case. I mean, he has a very comprehensive understanding of sport and preparation and physiology. So, but I think that that'll become more the norm. So,
yeah, I think, you know, like, I think the big takeaways I want for people to understand is I want them to just take a step back, especially therapists, and look at the bigger picture. Have a PhD in a sport that you love, or whatever you're trying to do. Really understand it from a broader level as well as a more in-depth level. Understand that it's about our youth, not about the current athlete. If you want to reduce the injury rates over time, we better deal with kids, and we better get them to move to thrive. So I want people to really understand that, and like, as much as I love running, and I'll always be in running. You know, like, my passion is movement. I want people to enjoy what you and I get to enjoy when you go for a run and I get to go for a run. I mean, that's like special, man. Like I want kids to understand that, man, this not only makes you feel physically good, but the cognitive benefits of it are like astronomical. And it needs to be taught from a young age, like we teach them how to add and subtract. It's not different.
Yeah, it's a skill.
So I think that's really what I'm passionate about. And for me, it's not different. Me seeing this professional runner over here or going to China is the same as me seeing a 10 or 11-year-old kid. It's not different, because that 10 or 11-year-old kid is, especially if he's going to become an athlete, I want them to have resiliency and be successful over time in whatever they do, regardless of how much they do it. So,
well, that sounds great. And I think that's just a good theme to sort of end on here. So, you know, we covered a lot of ground there. Hopefully it's not overwhelming or inundating people's time.
Hey, I really appreciate your time so much.
Yeah, of course. And I think there's a lot of commonalities. I mean, look, we've never met in person. We haven't had a chance to interact a lot beyond just online communication. Here we are emphasizing a lot of very similar points or takeaways. So, I think that's comforting to hear. And
well, if I'm ever up there, I'm going to look you up and I'll take you out for a beer.
Yeah, well, we'll run first and then
for sure. That's perfect.
Yeah. So, well, hey Jeff, I think you're up to great things. Any athlete or patient who's coming to work with you is fortunate to have you in the mix. And it sounds like you're heading over to China here in a couple weeks. So hopefully that's a great success. And I just want to thank you again for taking the time out of your week. I know you're very busy, and I really enjoyed just speaking with you and hearing your perspective on things. And I think it brings a fresh perspective.
No problem. I really appreciate the opportunity, and it was finally great to meet you, Chris. Like, you're doing amazing stuff, man. Just keep doing what you're doing. I love it.
Cool. I'm trying. I'm going to start explaining a little bit more about what I'm getting into. I put the silent videos out there so people can put their own verbiage into it. So I want it to just be a resource, and I'm not looking to make money off these videos. I want people to just have good information sources like yourself. There's a bunch of other folks in the mix who it's too long of a list to go through. But so, well, anyways, signing off. Hopefully the folks who watch this enjoy and reach out with any questions. And wishing everyone a happy weekend and a happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there.
Yeah. Great, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, we'll chat for a second after I get off here.
Okay.